So to move now to another provocative question, quite different, but also quite relevant. Can the private sector be humanitarian? We're going to hear from Hind M'hamdi, who is a consultant in Tetra Tech in their evaluation and research practice, and she works on the monitoring and evaluation of large-scale international development programs across sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, and North Africa. And Gordon Freer, who's Director of Insight Strategies. He has extensive experience in the evaluation of international development programs, including those focusing on the economic development within communities of vulnerable populations in fragile and conflict-affected areas.
Hi, good day, everyone. I'm not sure whether to say good afternoon, morning, or evening, depending on where you're dialing in from. But it is certainly morning here, 7:50 a.m. in London. My name is Hind M'hamdi. I'm an evaluation and research consultant in Tetra Tech International Development Europe. And with me today is Gordon. Gordon, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Hind. Hi, everyone. My name is Gordon Freer. I'm dialing in from Johannesburg in South Africa, and I'm the team lead on the Spring evaluation.
Thanks, Gordon. So today we are going to speak about lessons learned from evaluating the Spring program. As donor funding is increasingly stretched to meet the demands of humanitarian crises, we need to seek alternative solutions to these challenges. Now, one potential solution is to engage the private sector to achieve humanitarian objectives. However, this does come with its own set of dilemmas. And in this presentation, we will share some of these challenges from the Spring program specifically, as well as how some of these challenges were overcome.
Thanks, Hind. So just to give you a bit of a background on the structure for this presentation, we'll speak briefly about the Spring program itself, and then talk about some of the challenges that we've seen working with private sector businesses in trying to reach vulnerable girls, and some of the solutions that the businesses implemented to overcome these challenges. And finally, we'll sum up with some lessons on how this might inform involving the private sector in your own programs. Thanks, Hind. So Spring itself was a very unique program. It was funded by 3 different donors, by DFAT, by DFID, now the FCDO, and by USAID. It ran for a period of 5 years, and we as evaluators with Tetra Tech International Development Europe, we ran alongside the implementing partners for the full 5-year program with a longitudinal evaluation. It was implemented by a consortium led by Palladium, and it worked across 9 different countries in 2 different regions and touched 75 businesses, reaching more than 2.5 million girls. The aim of the program was to try and empower those girls, and empowerment was defined as ways to improve the lives of girls in 5 different thematic areas, getting them to learn, to earn, to stay safe, to stay healthy, and to stay well. Thanks, Hind.
That last one always gets me too.
Yeah.
So, the program and the participating businesses face several challenges. We've picked only a few in the interest of time. The first set are related to commercial viability and scale. So although the private sector, or these private sector businesses can develop solutions which benefit adolescent girls, the commercial viability of focusing only on this group was questionable, and therefore working with girls can be more appealing to businesses for social purposes or to attract donor funding. So many businesses, many Spring businesses faced a trade-off between commercial profitability and girl reach. Especially in the short term and in the context of low and middle income countries where strong economic, social norm, technological and contextual barriers exist to reaching adolescent girls. The second challenge relates to the value chain approach. So the original program design tried to economically empower girls by including them in the value chain of businesses and by placing assets within their control, as opposed to reaching them as consumers or service users. However, businesses faced several legal, cultural, and other barriers to hiring adolescent girls. In most countries, girls under 16 did not have legal citizen status, limiting the activities they could take part in. Girls often could not own a mobile phone, have their own bank account, or take out loans. There was also stigma around child labor, and all these challenges led to high dropout rates. We found as part of the evaluation that especially businesses which are themselves still at an early stage of their growth usually do not have the sufficient resources to invest in working with this particular group. And now one example is, oh, my slides were all over the place there, but I think we're back to the right one. So one example of this is Shekina. Shekina is an agro-processing company that specializes in dry goods in Rwanda. Its spring component consisted of establishing cooperatives of adolescent girls to manage the processing of cassava leaves and employing girls as marketers of Shekina products. Now, Shekina found that adolescent girls were often too shy to carry out marketing tasks or lacked the responsibility to manage the processing of cassava leaves. Overall, this led to Spring largely moving away from that strong focus on the value chain approach. Now, the second set of challenges is related to broad reach in terms of beneficiaries. So many adolescent girls lacked access to economic resources to purchase or access products or services, even more so in lower income groups. Girls also lacked economic independence and the freedom to make their own decisions. And most for-profit Spring businesses really struggled with this challenge during the program. So Spring eventually had to move away from reaching what they called the bottom of the pyramid to a broader focus on vulnerable girls. The second point here is related to the use of technology. So while tech-based products or services often reach high numbers of users, their users, and especially girls, can face several barriers to accessing and to continued use of these products or services over time. For example, younger girls had more limited opportunities to directly access technological solutions, because many did not have their own smartphones or were not allowed by their families or by government legislation to access content that was considered inappropriate, such as sexual health information. The use of technology was really most successful in urban markets where there is sufficient infrastructure and penetration of smartphone technology, as well as internet connectivity and sizable populations of technologically literate customers. One example here is Tetra Health, a Kenya-based startup company providing products and services to mothers and fathers during pregnancy and during the first 5 years of their children's lives. Now, Tetra Health found that using internet services was inappropriate for its main target audience, which led it to make its services available via SMS messages, which do not require mobile data nor access to smartphones. And this was really crucial to Tetra Health's success in reaching its target demographic. Now, the program and participating businesses also found several ways to overcome these challenges we just spoke about. So related to the challenges around commercial viability and scale, one of the ways they did so was by widening the focus of the target group. So several businesses decided to change their target group during and after their Spring participation. They chose to expand from targeting only girls to include other groups such as older women or boys and men as potential clients or beneficiaries. This was done to increase sustainability and the profitability, but also to achieve wider norm change in some cases. And businesses that were able to reach girls while maintaining a profitable business model either broadened their target group, as mentioned here, to include other groups, or they subsidized their work, which I will speak about next. In terms of breadth of reach, these businesses were also more successful in reaching a larger number of girls. One example of such a business is Paratran. Paratran offers mental, vocal, and physical self-defense training to girls and young women to reduce and mitigate the risk of sexual violence. And Paratron broadened its target group in its after its spring participation, expanding its offer to include boys programs. And this decision came about through research into their target group and feedback, target group and market, and feedback showed that boys were feeling excluded from these activities. So Paratron decided to include boys in its safety and security training, not only to ensure that they would not feel left out, but also to sensitize them on empathy and respect between genders and ensure their activities with girls were more likely to be effective. Now, where girl-specific products or services were successfully developed and launched, so where the target area wasn't broadened, businesses increased the sustainability of their products or services by working through NGOs, donor or government partners, or by subsidizing girl-focused activities through more profitable business streams or grant funding. On the challenges related to the value chain approach, so we found that adolescent girls here required more guidance, flexibility, and support than businesses had anticipated or that they could afford to provide, and that businesses that aim to provide income generation and employment opportunities to adolescent girls should really only do so if they have the necessary resources and capacity in place to provide ongoing support to girls, which can include mentoring, on-the-job training, and emotional support, as well as flexible work opportunities that are compatible with their and their family and school commitments. Finally, on the broad reach, so businesses can use technology in different ways to reach large number of girl users. And we found that those that benefited, so the businesses that benefited more vulnerable groups rather than exclusively urban, tech-savvy, wealthier girls, those businesses combined the use of relevant technology with in-person engagement to reach large numbers at a lower cost. So accompanying a digital approach with the physical presence of human representatives really helped increase, well, not only brand recognition, but also made the technology more accessible to its users. And one example here is Safe Boda, which it's a company that is trying to provide safe access to mobility by creating an app-based motorbike ride system with professional drivers that are trained in road safety, first aid, bike maintenance, and customer care. And Safe Boda decided to launch a brand ambassador program to supplement its digital program with human representatives at schools who encourage students to download and use the app. This made the technology more relatable to potential users and enabled the business to reach a higher number of new users. Total Health, which I briefly mentioned on the previous slide, is another example. They stationed female representatives in maternity wards to increase subscription to their SMS service. Finally, businesses that were most effective in reaching a broad audience with within their target group developed solutions which were user-friendly, interactive, and contextually appropriate, and which really understood girls' preferences and needs. And this was done through continued use of human-centered design. To target adolescent girls, Spring assisted businesses in a number of ways with the aim of helping them to better understand the target group, understand the value of engaging with this group, and tap into a, up until then, relatively unknown market for these businesses. Although some businesses already had some motivations to target girls, Spring further increased their interest and motivation to work with this group. And a crucial element of Spring's support was research into the target group and market, which was done using human-centered design. And most businesses reported that Spring's assistance in this really improved their understanding of girls, as well as their ability to tailor products or services to them. In fact, 61 out of 75 businesses said so. For example, some businesses mentioned that they did not fully understand the socioeconomic status of their target group before Spring, such as the lack of assets of girls and the level of access to education and health. And Spring really supported these businesses to understand the constraints that girls would face in accessing their products or services, and thereby how to best tailor products and services to them.
So in conclusion, Hind has shared a number of different challenges that businesses faced and the solutions that they implemented in order to be able to overcome those challenges. However, those lessons, together with a range of different lessons that we've learned through the 5-year evaluation of Spring, I think can allow us to be able to say that we think that the private sector actors can in fact be used as vehicles in order to be able to implement solutions in humanitarian circumstances. I don't think it would be fair for us to discount the role that these private sector actors can play. However, in order to be able to utilize them fully, we've got to be able to ensure that we meet those private sector actors where they are. We need to be able to understand their drivers. We need to be able to understand their motivations. We need to be able to speak their language. We need to be able to assist them to be able to get hold of, understand, and meet the needs of the target population that we're trying to address in our humanitarian response. And I think ultimately the longer term advantage of this is something that we need to look forward to. When our humanitarian intervention has ended, what will be left in our stead? There should be a functioning socio-economic, cultural fabric of a society. We won't be there to provide any of those services, and who will be providing the services that we hope the businesses will step up and offer? By engaging those businesses early, by helping them address the needs and identify the needs and address the needs of those vulnerable populations, we think that we'll be able to say that the businesses will continue to do so moving forward. If you would like to know more about the Spring program or the evaluation, please follow us on our website or go to and visit us at our website or follow us on Twitter. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Hind and Gordon. So I'm joined with Hind and Gordon now, who are in a position to answer any questions if there've any that have come up. I haven't actually seen any posed here, so I'm going to be provocative and just sort of ask, given I think we've had very different presentations in this session, and while I could see a really close link with localization in some of the others, I suppose I'm sort of wondering where you see the lessons for kind of handing over power and control to local actors from a perspective of the private sector, because I think it's sort of in some ways, sometimes the language of the private sector, sort of you're talking about, I guess, target groups and things like that, doesn't necessarily prompt the same kind of response that sort of NGO kind of language and discourse tends to sort of present. So have you got a perspective on that? You're muted, but feel free to jump in.
Can I jump in there, Hind? Great, thanks. Yeah, Dan, I think you're very right. Often the language isn't the same. We don't share the same language, and yet I think that's an oversight on our behalf, on our part as organizations that are engaged in humanitarian action. And as the concluding statement in the presentation there, the humanitarian intervention is not going to go on forever. At least that's the aspiration. What are we leaving behind? And one of the actors that exist in any situation is the private sector. And I think it's simply a case of don't overlook the private sector as an actor that can provide solutions. They are not NGOs provide incredibly valuable services, faith-based organizations provide incredibly valuable services, but simply because you speak different languages or think that your objectives are different, don't overlook the private sector players as well. They can, in fact, provide incredibly valuable strands to the fabric of society. Hind, I'm not sure if you want to add anything to that.
No, nothing further to add. Thanks, Gordon.
Okay, there's a question that somebody has asked, Amy Barber. Thanks, Amy. How do you find which businesses to approach for the projects, and how is it received by them? What other incentives do you have to encourage the private sector to engage?
Shall I take a first stab at that, Gordon?
Go ahead.
So I think, like we spoke about in the presentation, there are a few things, that we can learn from Spring, what Spring did in particular. And I think the most important things are to help businesses, to support them in understanding the value of engaging with, we called it the target group, but the beneficiary group, basically, to help businesses understand that there is actually an underserved sort of market, an invisible market that they could tap into. So really helping them sort of understand the benefits of doing that. And then also helping businesses sort of understand the actual beneficiary groups in context. So what are their needs and how can we sort of address those needs? And I think Spring did that very well through human-centered design, which is, I guess, a bit of a sort of practical or a methodology that sort of implements what our colleague Darina just presented about the sort of the customer-focused approach. And human-centered design was a methodology that involved several phases, including research, to identify sort of the key consumer groups, storytelling and synthesis, and then brainstorming solutions or ideas to sort of address those needs. So that's just sort of one methodology that was, or one tool that was used to help with this.